What began as a luxurious celebration to welcome a baby hid a tension invisible to the guests' eyes. During a speech full of appearances, a sincere sentence from the wife made the entire hall fall silent. Behind the curtains of the event, the truth exploded before live cameras, revealing a violence no one expected. But it was in that instant, between chaos and exposure, that a woman began to free herself from the life she only pretended to live. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers that seemed to capture all the elegance of London in a single evening. Marina Thompson adjusted the navy blue silk dress that delicately caressed her 20-week baby bump, feeling the weight of hundreds of guests' gazes. The gender reveal party she and Raphael had organized wasn't just an intimate celebration of the baby she was carrying. It was a meticulously planned event designed to impress investors, business partners, and all of London's high society, who could open even greater doors for her husband's meteoric career. Raphael Miller was the kind of man who commanded attention in any room. At 38, he already held the executive vice presidency of Ocean Logistics, one of the country's largest port logistics companies. His impeccable Italian suit, the discreetly gleaming Swiss watch on his wrist, and the calculated smile he offered with every greeting formed the perfect image of British corporate success. Marina knew everything about that night needed to be perfect. Raphael had made that abundantly clear in recent weeks, supervising every detail of the event with the same rigidity he applied to board meetings. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and special juices for expectant mothers, while the pastel-toned decor created a dreamlike atmosphere. Gold balloons hung from the ceiling, and an elaborate dessert table occupied an entire side wall of the ballroom. Marina forced a smile as she greeted Lucy Adams, wife of one of the company's major partners, who effusively praised her dress and inquired about morning sickness, with that tone of false concern Marina knew so well. The truth was, Marina did feel sick, yes, but not just from pregnancy. There was a different, deeper nausea that came from within every time Raphael corrected her tone of voice at home, every time he commented on her pregnancy weight gain, with that look of disapproval disguised as medical concern, every time she had to ask permission for any decision involving her own life. But this truth, Marina kept locked away in some dark place within herself, a place she visited only in sleepless pre-dawn hours, when Raphael slept and she could finally relax the tense muscles in her shoulders. The ambient music was replaced by a more vibrant sound, as the master of ceremonies, a well-known local TV presenter, whom Raphael had specially hired for the event, ascended the small stage set up in the center of the ballroom. The lights adjusted, guests gathered in an elegant semicircle, and Marina felt her heart race. Raphael took her hand firmly, a gesture that to others seemed affectionate, but which she recognized as control. His fingers squeezed hers hard enough to remind her that she needed to smile, wave, and say exactly what they had rehearsed. The presenter made a few light jokes about fatherhood and responsibility, eliciting polite laughter from the audience. Raphael took the stage first, waving like a politician on the campaign trail, and began his prepared speech about family, legacy, and the values he intended to pass on to the son or daughter on the way. Marina listened to the words flowing from his mouth with the perfection of someone who had memorized them, but she couldn't help but think how different the man on stage was from the man who awaited her at home every night. At home there were no applause. There were cutting silences when dinner wasn't exactly to his liking. There were comments about how she could dress better, even while pregnant. There was that cold stare he reserved only for her, that tone of voice he never used in front of others. Marina had learned to decipher every micro-expression of displeasure on Raphael's face, developed a sixth sense to anticipate his reactions and adjust her behavior before he needed to correct her. It was exhausting, but she had convinced herself it was normal, that all marriages had their challenges, that she was probably being overly sensitive. When Raphael called her to the stage, Marina ascended the 3 steps carefully, her free hand lightly supporting her belly. Camera flashes momentarily blinded her. She knew there were at least 3 professional photographers hired for the event, in addition to dozens of guests recording every moment on their phones. Raphael pulled her close, his arm wrapping around her shoulders, in that public display of affection he never replicated in private. The presenter asked a few more rehearsed questions about the baby's nursery preparations, chosen names and expectations for motherhood and fatherhood. Marina responded with the phrases they had agreed upon, maintaining the light and cheerful tone Raphael had demanded. But then, in a moment of vulnerability brought on by pregnancy fatigue and the emotional exhaustion of maintaining that facade, she let something true slip out. The presenter had just asked Raphael how he planned to balance his demanding career with fatherhood. Raphael gave his polished answer about priorities and organization, and then, almost without thinking, Marina leaned slightly towards the microphone and said in a low voice, but clear enough to be picked up, "It would be nice if he saved some of that affection he's showing here today for when we're alone at home." The comment came out in a tone she tried to make sound playful, but there was a raw truth in those words that echoed through the ballroom. Some guests laughed nervously, unsure if it was an inside joke between the couple or something more serious. Others exchanged uncomfortable glances. Marina felt Raphael stiffen beside her, his fingers squeezing her shoulder too hard, hurting through the thin fabric of her dress. Raphael let out a forced laugh and quickly replied, "Marina's getting emotional with the pregnancy, you know how it is," trying to turn it into a funny moment, but Marina saw his jaw clench, saw the muscle pulsing in his temple, all the signs she knew so well and which indicated he was furious. The presenter, an experienced professional, quickly steered the conversation to another topic, and soon the moment of the baby's gender reveal arrived, with balloons being popped and pink confetti raining down on everyone as guests applauded and shouted congratulations. It was a girl. Marina should have been radiant, but all she could feel was a tightening in her chest as she imagined what awaited her when they left that stage. Raphael maintained his smile for the photos, embraced Marina for the cameras, but she felt the tension in his every muscle, the contained anger he masterfully disguised for the public. Among the crowd of guests, a 23-year-old woman named Julia Smith held her phone with trembling hands. She wasn't exactly a guest. She was a social media influencer Raphael had hired to provide live coverage of the event on her social media channels. With over 200,000 followers, Julia was known for her spontaneous broadcasts of social events in London, and Raphael believed her presence would give the event more visibility, connecting it with a younger, digital audience. Julia had noticed the change in atmosphere on stage. Her content creator's instinct, trained to capture authentic moments amidst the rehearsed, alerted her that something was off about that interaction. Marina's comment, the visible squeeze on her shoulder, the tension radiating from Raphael despite his smile, all of it was recorded in her live stream. Comments on her phone were already starting to question what had happened, with some followers pointing out that something seemed wrong. When Raphael led Marina off the stage, holding her elbow too firmly while waving to guests, Julia felt a knot in her stomach. She had grown up watching her own mother navigate a difficult marriage. She knew the signs of a relationship where respect was merely a public performance. Without thinking much, she continued recording and began to discreetly follow the couple, keeping a safe distance as they moved away from the main ballroom. Guests resumed circulating, conversations restarted, and the party continued its course. But Julia kept her camera on, her heart racing, a feeling that she was about to witness something important, something that needed to be documented. She didn't yet know that this decision would not only change Marina's life, but would spark a wave of transformations that would reach far beyond that gilded ballroom at the Grand Metropolitan. The hotel service corridor was a brutal contrast to the elegance of the ballroom. The plain white walls, raw fluorescent lighting, and smell of cleaning products created a completely different reality, as if Marina had crossed an invisible boundary between two worlds. Raphael gently pushed her into that space, away from curious eyes, and finally dropped the mask he had worn all night. Marina took a deep breath, trying to apply the techniques Dr. Emily Roberts, her obstetrician, had taught her. Inhale counting to 4, hold for 2 seconds, exhale counting to 6. The baby needed her to stay calm, for her heart not to race, for cortisol not to flood her system. But it was hard to stay calm when Raphael looked at her that way, with that mixture of anger and contempt he never showed anyone but her. Raphael began in a low, controlled voice, each word coming out with surgical precision. Do you have any idea what you just did in there? Do you realize how many important people were watching? The CEO of C-Tech was in the front row, Marina. The man who could decide if I'll take over the company's presidency in the next 6 months was there. And you decide to put on this little act, he ran, a hand through his perfectly combed hair, disarranging it for the first time that night. I've worked for years building a reputation, an image, and you managed to jeopardize everything with a single, idiotic sentence. Marina felt tears threaten to escape, but forced them back down. Crying would only make things worse, she knew. Raphael despised crying, called it emotional manipulation, weakness. I didn't mean to cause trouble, she began, her voice coming out weaker than she intended. It was just a comment. I thought people would find it funny, that they'd understand it as a couple's joke. Raphael let out a humorless laugh, that harsh sound Marina had learned to fear. Funny? You think exposing our private relationship in public is funny? You made me look like a neglectful husband in front of half of London's business elite. He moved closer to her, and Marina instinctively took a step back, her hand automatically going to her belly in a protective gesture. I give you everything, Marina. A house in Kensington, an unlimited credit card, this absurdly expensive party you wanted. And how do you repay me? By publicly humiliating me. Marina wanted to scream that he didn't give her everything, that there were things money couldn't buy, like respect, like kindness, like the right to be herself without constant judgment. But the words got stuck in her throat, as they always did when she needed to confront him. Years of small corrections, of criticisms disguised as advice, of silent punishments through days of cold treatment, had taught Marina that disagreeing with Raphael came at too high a price. It was at that moment, hidden in the service corridor, as Raphael vented his frustration, that Julia turned the corner with her phone still live streaming. She held the phone at a discreet angle, but the audio perfectly captured every word. On her phone screen, the comments exploded. Her followers, who initially thought they were just watching coverage of another chic social event, now realized they were witnessing something completely different. Marina didn't see Julia, too focused on trying to calm Raphael, on trying to find the right words that could diffuse his anger. Raphael, please, let's go back to the party. People will notice our absence. We can talk about this at home calmly. She tried to touch his arm, but Raphael recoiled as if her touch burned him. On the service table beside them, there was a tray with coffee cups prepared for the hotel staff. Raphael picked up one of the cups, and Marina thought for a second he was going to drink it, that he was going to take a break, that he was going to breathe and regain the control he valued so much. But then she saw his gaze change, saw the decision form in his eyes, and knew that something bad was about to happen. The coffee wasn't boiling, but it was hot enough. When Raphael threw the liquid towards her in an abrupt, impulsive movement, Marina didn't have time to completely dodge. The coffee hit the left side of her face, ran down her neck, soaked her silk dress. The burning sensation wasn't the worst, although it stung, and her skin immediately began to redden. The worst was the shock, the realization that Raphael had crossed a line she always believed he never would. Marina gasped, her hand flying to her wet face, and then to her belly, as if she could protect the baby from the trauma she herself was feeling. Her heart pounded, her breathing became rapid and shallow, and for a moment all she could think was that the stress could harm the baby. That Dr. Emily Roberts had warned about staying calm, about avoiding high-stress situations during pregnancy. Raphael seemed to awaken from some kind of trance, his eyes widening as he realized what he had done. He took a step towards her, hands outstretched. Marina, I didn't mean to. It was an accident. I was just holding the cup and you came closer and... But his words died when he saw Julia standing at the end of the corridor, her phone clearly pointed at them, the red recording, light shining like an accusing eye. Julia was pale, her eyes wide, but her hand held the phone steady. Her voice came out trembling when she spoke. It's all live. Everything. Tens of thousands of people just saw what you did. On her phone screen, She could see comments scrolling at an impossible-to-follow speed. People calling for the police, sharing the video, tagging profiles of women's support organizations, expressing shock and outrage. Marina looked at Julia, then at Raphael, then at her own coffee-wet hands. The reality of the situation began to penetrate through the shock. It was live. Thousands of people had witnessed it. It was no longer something private, something she could hide or minimize or pretend hadn't happened. The secret she had kept for so long, the truth about her marriage that she hid even from herself, was now exposed for the entire world to see. Raphael regained his composure with impressive speed, that corporate instinct for damage control kicking in. He turned to Julia, his voice taking on a tone of authority. "Turn that off now. You were hired to cover the party, not to invade our privacy. This is a breach of contract." But even as he spoke, he knew it was too late. The video was already out there, already being shared, already out of his control. Marina felt her legs weaken. The adrenaline that had kept her standing began to dissipate, leaving behind a deep fatigue and a worrying dizziness. She leaned against the wall, her breathing still erratic, and it was Julia who reacted first, dropping her phone to the floor and rushing to support Marina before she completely collapsed. It was at that moment that 2 hotel employees appeared in the corridor, alerted by the noise. An older woman wearing a manager's uniform quickly assessed the scene with experienced eyes. She saw Marina's wet dress, the reddened skin on her face and neck, the way she held her belly, and immediately grabbed the radio from her belt. Marina heard through the fog of shock the woman requesting urgent medical assistance, mentioning a pregnant woman, speaking in codes she didn't understand, but that sounded serious and efficient. Raphael tried to take control of the situation, explaining to the staff that it had been an accident, that his wife was fine, that there was no need for such a commotion. But the hotel manager wasn't listening. She had training for these situations, knew how to recognize when something was more serious than it appeared on the surface. And she had just seen the live video on her own phone, alerted by her daughter, who was among the online viewers. More staff arrived, bringing clean towels and fresh water. A nurse who was among the party guests was located and quickly came to the corridor. She examined Marina with professional care, asking questions about pain, about the baby, about her vital signs. Marina responded automatically, her mind still trying to process how her life had completely changed in the space of a few minutes. Julia retrieved her phone from the floor and saw that the broadcast was still active. Hundreds of comments continued to pour in, and now there were even notifications from media outlets asking for permission to use the video, asking for more information, offering support. She looked at Marina, at that pregnant and vulnerable woman who was clearly in shock, and made a decision. She would keep the broadcast active, keep the record of what was happening, because she had a feeling that Marina would need all possible evidence of what had occurred in that corridor. The arrival of paramedics transformed the service corridor into a scene of controlled urgency. 2 professionals entered carrying a stretcher and medical equipment, their movements precise and trained. Marina was gently led to the hotel's first aid room, a small but well-equipped space usually used for minor emergencies during events. The nurse who had first examined her quickly passed the information to the paramedics. 20-week pregnant woman, hot liquid burn on face and neck, signs of acute stress. Marina was lying on the stretcher, still trembling, when one of the paramedics began to check her vital signs: elevated blood pressure, accelerated heart rate, shallow breathing. He asked questions in a calm, professional voice about abdominal pain, contractions, bleeding. Marina replied that, no, the baby was moving normally, but her voice came out weak and distant, as if it belonged to someone else. Meanwhile, the hotel manager had called the police. It wasn't a decision she had taken lightly, but protocol was clear in situations involving possible violence, especially with a pregnant woman involved. Furthermore, her phone wouldn't stop receiving notifications. Julia's video was viral, already surpassing 500,000 views and growing exponentially. The hashtag some viewers created was beginning to appear on trending topics across the UK. In the main ballroom, the party had collapsed. Guests were divided between those who still didn't know what had happened and continued talking animatedly, and those who had already seen the video on their phones and whispered in hushed groups, glancing towards the door where Raphael and Marina had disappeared. Lucy Adams, the wife of the major partner, was one of the first to see it. She turned pale as she watched, remembering small moments at previous dinners, the way Raphael sometimes interrupted Marina mid-sentence, how he corrected her opinions in public with that tone that sounded like a joke but had something darker underneath. 2 police officers arrived first, quickly followed by a support vehicle. The hotel manager led them to the first aid room, explaining the situation. One of the officers, a man in his 40s with an experienced gaze, entered the room where Marina was being treated. He introduced himself as Sergeant Davies and asked if she felt able to talk. Marina nodded, though her hands still trembled. Raphael tried to enter the room behind the police but was gently prevented by Sergeant Davies. "Sir, I'm going to need you to wait outside while we talk to your wife," Raphael protested, saying he had a right to be present, that he was her husband, that it was all an absurd misunderstanding. The officer maintained his position with professional firmness, and Raphael finally stepped away, but not before giving Marina a look she knew well, a look that said she would pay for this later. Marina recounted what had happened in a shaky voice, words coming with difficulty. She minimized, as she always did, saying that Raphael probably didn't intend it, that the coffee wasn't that hot, that she might have overreacted because of pregnancy hormones. Sergeant Davies listened with a neutral expression, but she noticed when he exchanged a meaningful glance with his colleague, a younger female officer who was taking notes on a tablet. It was the female officer who showed Marina the video on her tablet. Marina watched herself in that corridor, saw the way Raphael spoke to her, saw the moment the coffee flew towards her, saw her own shocked face. It was strange to see it from the outside, as if she were watching someone else, but it was her and it was real, and there was no denying or minimizing it when it was all there, brutally clear. Meanwhile, in the corridor, Raphael was surrounded by 2 other police officers who were asking their own questions. He maintained his composure, explaining that it had been a complete accident, that he was holding the cup when Marina suddenly approached, and he was startled. His version was coherent, his voice was calm, and he used all his executive skill accustomed to negotiating and persuading. But the police had also seen the video, and Raphael's narrative didn't completely align with what the images showed. Julia was still at the hotel, now sitting in one of the reception chairs, her phone finally turned off after ending the broadcast. She felt nauseous, her hands trembled, and she could barely believe what she had witnessed. A representative from a women's support organization had already contacted her via direct message, asking for details, offering support for Marina, asking if it would be possible to provide the full video as evidence. The organization's lawyer arrived at the hotel 40 minutes after the incident. Her name was Dr. Helen Rodriguez, a 52-year-old woman with gray hair neatly pulled back in a bun, and eyes that had seen many cases like this. She spoke first with the police, identifying herself and explaining that her organization was offering free legal assistance to Marina, should she wish. Then, with the permission of the police and Marina, she entered the first aid room. Marina looked at that unknown woman entering with such determination and felt something break inside her. Perhaps it was the kindness in Dr. Helen's eyes, or perhaps it was simply the accumulation of years pretending everything was fine. But suddenly Marina was crying, deep sobs that shook her entire body, while the paramedic quickly checked if the stress was affecting the baby. Dr. Helen sat beside the stretcher and waited patiently, without rushing, holding Marina's hand as she cried years of accumulated pain. When Marina finally managed to speak, the words poured out in a torrent. She talked about Raphael's constant comments about her weight, her appearance, her opinions. She talked about how he controlled every aspect of her life, from the clothes she wore to the friends she could see. She talked about the loneliness of living with someone who only showed affection in public, and who privately treated her like an incompetent employee. She talked about the times she had thought about asking for help, but had convinced herself that she was overreacting, that all marriages had problems, that she should be grateful for the comfortable life he provided. Dr. Helen listened to everything, occasionally asking specific questions, taking mental notes. She recognized the patterns, had seen this type of relationship hundreds of times. Control disguised as care, criticism masked as concern, the gradual isolation of the woman from her support networks. And now, with the pregnancy making Marina more vulnerable, Raphael's behaviors had escalated to that point of physical violence. Paramedics decided that Marina needed to go to the hospital for a more complete evaluation. Although the burn was superficial and was already being treated, the main concern was the stress and its impact on the baby. Marina agreed, and it was then that Dr. Helen asked a crucial question. "Marina, do you want to go home with Raphael tonight?" The question hung in the air like something solid. Marina had never considered the possibility of not going home. Where else would she go? How would she live? But then she thought of the look Raphael had given her before the police prevented him from entering the room, and a shiver ran down her spine. She thought of returning to that house in Kensington, of being alone with him after all those people were gone, after there were no more witnesses. Marina looked at Dr. Helen and for the first time in a long time said what she really felt. "No, I don't want to." Her voice was just a whisper, but it was laden with a certainty that surprised her. Dr. Helen squeezed her hand and nodded. "Then we'll make sure you have a safe place to stay tonight." In the main ballroom, the party had officially ended. Guests were gently dismissed by the hotel staff with vague apologies about a medical emergency. But everyone knew what had happened. The video was on all phones, in all conversations. Lucy Adams was already on the phone with her husband, who was on a business trip in Manchester, recounting what she had witnessed. Other guests made similar calls, and the news spread through London's business elite like wildfire. Raphael was still at the hotel, now sitting on a reception sofa under the watchful eye of 2 police officers. His personal lawyer was on his way, already alerted to the situation. Raphael maintained an appearance of calm, but inside he was calculating the impact on his career, on his reputation, on the negotiations he had underway. He needed to control that narrative, to turn it into an unfortunate accident, a misunderstanding amplified by social media. He was good at it. He had always been good at controlling narratives. But what Raphael had not yet fully understood was that control had slipped from his hands the moment that coffee flew through the air towards Marina's face. There was no longer any way to minimize it, no longer any way to hide behind closed doors. The world had seen, and the world would not forget. The ambulance cut through the streets of London with its siren piercing the night. Marina was lying on the stretcher, connected to monitors that tracked her vital signs and the baby's heart rate. Dr. Helen followed in the seat beside her, her serene presence offering a comfort Marina didn't know she needed. Through the ambulance's rear window, she could see the city lights passing, and had the strange feeling that she was leaving. Something behind, not just physically, but in a deeper way. St. Jude's Hospital in West London had an obstetrics emergency department renowned for its excellence. Marina was quickly taken to an examination room, where a team was already prepared to receive her. Dr. Paula Jones, the on-call obstetrician that night, was in her 40s and had a maternal manner that immediately put Marina more at ease. She performed a complete examination using ultrasound to check the baby, monitoring heartbeats, measuring the cervix to ensure there were no signs of premature labor. The baby was fine. Those words sounded like a blessing to Marina. Despite all the stress, all the adrenaline, all the emotional trauma, the little life inside her remained protected, remained strong. Marina saw on the monitor the tiny heart beating at a constant rhythm and felt tears of relief roll down her cheeks. Dr. Paula smiled gently. "She's a fighter, your daughter. But you need to take care of yourself too, Marina. Stress affects the baby, yes, but it affects you first." While the medical team continued the examinations, Dr. Helen made some calls. She contacted Hope House, a shelter specializing in supporting pregnant women in vulnerable situations. The space had private rooms, psychological counseling, legal assistance, and all the necessary support for women like Marina to rebuild their lives in safety. A vacancy was available, and Dr. Helen reserved it immediately. Marina listened to the conversation with a mixture of relief and fear. The idea of going to a shelter was both liberating and terrifying. She had never needed help like this, had always been the wife of a successful executive, always had credit cards and a luxurious home. But now, confronted with the reality that she couldn't go back to that house, that she had no money of her own, that her bank account was in Raphael's name, she realized how vulnerable she truly was. The nurse caring for the burn on Marina's face and neck worked with delicate care, applying appropriate ointment and dressings. The burn was first degree, would be painful for a few days, but would leave no permanent scars. But the nurse, a woman named Claudia, who had worked there for 15 years, knew that emotional scars were a completely different story. It was Claudia who mentioned Dr. Beatrice Allen, a psychologist specializing in trauma, who volunteered her services to women in domestic violence situations. "She's amazing," Claudia said as she adjusted the dressing. "I've seen her help many women recover, find strength they didn't even know they had." Marina accepted the card with the psychologist's contact, tucking it into the small purse she still carried from the event. While Marina was in the hospital, the story continued to gain monumental dimensions on social media. Julia, back home, was sitting on the sofa in her small flat in Islington, her phone exploding with notifications. The video had already surpassed 3 million views. Major news outlets were contacting her asking for interviews. Celebrities with Qasididi. Millions of followers were sharing and commenting. The hashtag had turned into a movement, but Julia didn't feel like a hero. She felt nauseous, guilty in some way, as if she had invaded a private moment even though she knew she had done the right thing by keeping the camera on. She thought of Marina, wondering how that woman was, if the baby was okay, if she had a safe place to go. That's why, when Dr. Helen contacted her asking for the complete, unedited video to use as evidence, Julia sent it immediately, on the condition that her name be kept confidential in legal proceedings. The next morning, Marina woke up in a simple but welcoming room at Hope House. She had slept poorly, waking several times with nightmares where Raphael was at the door, demanding she come home. But each time she woke with a start, she saw the unfamiliar walls, heard the different sounds, and remembered she was safe. There was a lock on the door. There were other people nearby. There was a protective network she had never known existed. The coordinator of Hope House, Ms. Eleanor Green, was a 60-year-old black woman with a warm smile and eyes that had seen much pain but still held hope. She gently knocked on Marina's door at 8 in the morning, bringing coffee and buttered toast. "Good morning, dear. When you're ready, there's breakfast in the communal kitchen. No rush, take your time." Marina went down to the kitchen an hour later, after a long shower where she cried under the spray, letting the water wash away not only the sweat and fatigue from the night before, but also something deeper. In the kitchen there were 3 other women, one pregnant like her, 2 with small babies. They greeted her kindly without asking many questions, respecting her space. It was a silent camaraderie, a mutual understanding that needed no words. As Marina had her coffee, her phone rang. It was Dr. Helen, asking if she would be willing to receive a visit from a prosecutor who was interested in her case. Marina hesitated for a moment, but then thought of the video, of how millions of people already knew what had happened, and realized there was no turning back. "Yes," she replied. "She can come." Prosecutor Andrea Carter arrived at Hope House at noon. She was a 38-year-old woman with short hair and a demeanor that inspired confidence. But what Marina didn't know was that Prosecutor Carter had a personal history that made her particularly dedicated to cases like this. Her own sister had gone through an abusive relationship years ago, and although she had managed to leave, the scars remained. That's why Andrea had chosen to specialize in cases involving violence against women. Sitting in Hope House's private counseling room, Andrea explained Marina's rights. She could request an emergency restraining order, which would prevent Raphael from approaching or contacting her. She could seek alimony, both for herself, during pregnancy, and for the baby after it was born. She could, if she wished, file a formal complaint about the events of the previous night. Marina listened, trying to absorb so much information. Her whole life had been controlled by Raphael, and now she had to make important decisions on her own. It was terrifying, but there was also something liberating about it. "I want the restraining order," she said, her voice gaining firmness, "and I want to file a complaint. What he did was not an accident, I know it wasn't." Andrea smiled with approval. "You are stronger than you imagine, Marina." She opened her briefcase and began to take out the necessary forms. "We'll do this step by step. You're not alone." While Marina signed documents and formally reported the events, Raphael was in his office in central London, meeting with a team of 3 lawyers and 2 crisis management specialists. The room had a view of the London cityscape, but Raphael barely noticed the scenery that usually captivated him. He was focused on damage control, on saving what could be saved of his reputation and career. His lead lawyer, Mr. Mark Taylor, was direct. "Raphael, the situation is serious. The video is clear, has millions of views, and the public narrative has already formed. You need to consider a settlement, perhaps a public statement taking responsibility and seeking treatment." Raphael slammed his hand on the table. "Take responsibility for what? It was an accident. I didn't intend to hurt Marina. She's exaggerating everything because of pregnancy hormones." But even as he spoke, he knew his arguments sounded hollow in the face of the video everyone had seen. The crisis management specialist, a young man with thick-rimmed glasses, intervened. "Mr. Miller, with all due respect, the public narrative is not on your side. People saw the way you spoke to your wife, saw the moment of the incident. Total denial will only make things worse. Your best chance is to show genuine remorse and seek professional help." But Raphael wasn't ready to accept that. He had built his career on being the man who was always in control, the man who never showed weakness. Admitting failure, admitting he had treated Marina badly, admitting he needed help, all of it went against every fiber of his being. "Find another solution," he said, his voice cold and final. "I will not bow to the social media mob." The week following the incident brought an avalanche of consequences that no one could have fully predicted. Marina was at Hope House, attending daily sessions with Dr. Beatrice Allen, the psychologist Claudia had recommended. In these sessions, Marina was beginning to understand that what she had experienced had a name: psychological abuse. For years, she had normalized behaviors that were not normal, had accepted treatment she should not have accepted, had convinced herself that the problem lay with her. Beatrice worked patiently, helping Marina identify patterns of control and manipulation that had become invisible to her over the years. "When you asked to buy that blouse you liked in the store, and Raphael said it didn't look good on you, what did you feel?" Beatrice asked during a session. Marina thought for a moment, recalling that afternoon 6 months ago. "I felt he was right, that I had no taste, that it was good he was there to guide me." She paused, realizing for the first time the distortion of that thought. "But before I met Raphael, I always chose my own clothes and felt good in them." Beatrice nodded. "Exactly, he systematically undermined your confidence in your own choices, in your own judgment. That is a very subtle but very effective form of control." Marina felt as if she was seeing her own life through new lenses, and what she saw was both painful and liberating. While Marina worked on her emotional recovery, outside Hope House the world was in turmoil. Investigative journalist Camilla Nolan, who was among the guests at the gender reveal party, had decided to do an in-depth report on Raphael Miller. Camilla worked for one of the largest news portals in the UK and had a reputation for being meticulous and tireless in her investigations. Camilla began by interviewing former ocean logistics employees. What she discovered was a consistent pattern of behavior. 3 former secretaries reported that they had requested transfers or resigned because of Raphael's hostile treatment. A former manager recounted meetings where Raphael publicly humiliated team members for minor mistakes. A former intern mentioned that he had a habit of making comments about female employees' physical appearance disguised as jokes, but that made everyone uncomfortable. But the most impactful discovery came when Camilla gained access to a series of internal company emails. They revealed that 2 years prior, an employee had filed a formal complaint with the Human Resources Department about workplace harassment by Raphael. The complaint had been investigated internally, but then, mysteriously, filed away. The employee had received a generous severance package and signed a non-disclosure agreement. Camilla could not use the woman's name, but the pattern of behavior was clear. Camilla's report was published on a Tuesday, exactly 6 days after the hotel incident. The title was direct: Executive Raphael Miller, A History of Abuse of Power. The article was 4,000 words long, meticulously documented, and included not only interviews but also analyses from experts in corporate behavior and psychological abuse. The impact was immediate and devastating. Ocean Logistics shares, which had already fallen 15% since the viral video, plummeted another 20%. Institutional investors began asking difficult questions of the board of directors. Important business partners sent letters expressing concern. A large contract with a European company, which was in final negotiation, was abruptly suspended until the situation is resolved. Edward Sampson, the CEO of Ocean Logistics, called an emergency board meeting. The boardroom on the 20th floor of the corporate building was tense. 12 board members were present, their faces grim. Edward got straight to the point. Gentlemen and ladies, we need to discuss Raphael Miller's situation. His presence in the company is becoming unsustainable. There were heated discussions. Some board members argued that they could not fire Raphael based on a personal incident and unproven accusations from former employees. Others insisted that the company's reputation was at stake, that they had a responsibility not only to shareholders, but to all employees. Lucy Adams, whose husband was the major partner, had shared her own observations about Raphael's behavior with him, and he was firmly in the camp of those who wanted immediate removal. After 3 hours of debate, the decision was made. Raphael would be placed on indefinite administrative leave while an independent investigation was conducted. If the investigation confirmed the allegations, he would be dismissed for gross misconduct. The decision was communicated to Raphael through a formal call from the company's legal department. He received the news in silence, but those who knew him well knew he was seething inside. Marina learned the news through Dr. Helen, who followed all the repercussions of the case. She felt a strange mix of emotions. There was no joy in seeing Raphael's professional collapse. After all, she had spent years by his side, had shared dreams of success. But there was also a sense of validation that perhaps what she had experienced was not as insignificant as Raphael had always made her believe. That same day, Marina had her first antenatal appointment since the incident. Dr. Emily Roberts, her trusted obstetrician, made a point of seeing her personally, even though it wasn't her on-call day. She examined Marina carefully, checking the baby's development, measuring the growth of her belly, listening to the heartbeats that remained strong and regular. "How are you feeling emotionally?" Dr. Emily Roberts asked, her hands still gently resting on Marina's belly. Marina considered the question. How was she feeling? It was complicated. There was fear of the future, of financial uncertainty, of what it would be like to raise a baby alone. There was guilt for having publicly exposed Raphael, even though she knew rationally it wasn't her fault. There was anger for all the years she had wasted trying to be perfect for someone who would never value her. But there was also something new, something she was beginning to recognize, hope. "I'm scared," Marina admitted, "but I'm also starting to feel something I haven't felt in a long time. I'm starting to feel that maybe I can do this, that maybe I'm stronger than I thought." Dr. Emily Roberts smiled and gently squeezed her hand. "You are, Marina. You are much stronger than you imagine." Meanwhile, protests began to form on social media and in the streets. Women's rights organizations called for a demonstration in front of the Ocean Logistics building, demanding not only Raphael's definitive removal, but also structural changes in how companies handle complaints of harassment and abuse. Hundreds of women attended, many sharing their own stories of abusive relationships, toxic work environments, of times they weren't believed when they reported. Julia was at the demonstration, filming discreetly. She was no longer live streaming. She had learned her lesson about the weight of public exposure. But she wanted to document it, wanted to show how a single exposed truth could create waves that reached far beyond the original incident. She saw signs with messages of support for Marina, saw women crying as they shared their stories, saw the collective strength of people who had decided they would no longer accept silence. Back at Hope House, Marina was in the communal living room watching television coverage of the demonstration. Ms. Eleanor Green sat beside her, putting an arm around her shoulders. "See what your courage has inspired," she said softly. "See how many women are finding strength in your story." Marina watched with tears in her eyes, feeling both too small and too large for the moment. That night, alone in her room, Marina picked up her phone for the first time in days. She had avoided looking at social media, afraid of judgment, of the cruel comments she knew would exist, but now with her hand, trembling slightly, she opened Instagram. Her message inbox was full. Thousands of messages. She started reading randomly. One woman wrote that she had left an abusive relationship after seeing Marina's video, realizing that what she was experiencing was also not normal. Another thanked her for having the courage not to hide it, saying she had a young daughter and wanted her to grow up in a world where women didn't have to accept disrespectful treatment. A man wrote apologizing, saying he had recognized some of his own behaviors in Raphael's video and was seeking therapy to change. Marina read message after message, crying, laughing, feeling connected to thousands of people she would never know, but who somehow shared her pain and her hope. It was overwhelming and healing at the same time. She was not alone. She had never been alone. She just hadn't known where to look for company. Raphael, alone in his Kensington apartment, was also on his phone. But his experience was completely different. Every notification was an accusation, every article was a judgment, every social media post was a condemnation. He had lost followers by the thousands, had been blocked by important professional contacts, had seen his carefully built reputation crumble in a matter of days. And the worst was that he couldn't understand how everything had spiraled so completely out of control. 2 months had passed since that night at the Grand Metropolitan. Marina was now 28 weeks pregnant, her belly visibly larger, the baby's movements increasingly strong and frequent. She had moved from Hope House to a small apartment in Hampstead, a bohemian neighborhood in the London hills with narrow cobblestone streets and renovated old houses. The apartment had only one bedroom, a small living room, a functional kitchen, and a tiny balcony overlooking the city. It wasn't luxurious like the house in Kensington, but it was hers. The apartment was made possible by an emergency fund that Dr. Helen's organization maintained for cases like Marina's, as well as donations from people moved by her story. Marina had initially resisted, feeling uncomfortable accepting charity, but Ms. Eleanor Green had been firm. "Accepting help when you need it is not weakness, dear. It's intelligence. You'll have time to give back to the world when you're back on your feet." The restraining order had been granted. Raphael could not approach within 200 meters of Marina, could not contact her directly, could not attend the same places she frequented. Violation of the order would result in immediate arrest. Marina carried a copy of the court order in her bag always, even knowing that Raphael was too busy dealing with his own consequences to pursue her. Marina had started working remotely as a freelance translator. She was fluent in English and Spanish, a skill she had developed in college, but that Raphael had always discouraged her from using professionally, saying it wasn't necessary since he provided everything. Now that skill was becoming her source of income. It wasn't much yet, but it was enough to pay her basic expenses, and more importantly, it was hers. Every penny she earned from her own work was a small victory over the dependence Raphael had created. The deepest transformation, however, was happening internally. Marina continued her weekly sessions with Dr. Beatrice Allen, exploring layers and layers of trauma, low self-esteem, of thought patterns that had been distorted over the years. She was learning to recognize when she blamed herself for things that weren't her responsibility, when she minimized her own needs, when she allowed Raphael's voice in her head to dictate her decisions. It was during one of these sessions that a revelation occurred that would change everything. Marina was telling Beatrice about her childhood, about how her father had also been controlling with her mother, how she had grown up seeing that as normal. "My father never hit my mother," Marina said, "but he controlled everything. The money, her friendships, even what she wore. And my mother always said it was because he loved her, because he cared." Beatrice watched her intently. "And your mother, Marina? Where is she now?" Marina was silent for a long moment. Her mother had died of cancer 3 years before, and Marina had always felt that she had given up fighting for life, as if she was too tired to continue. "She's gone," Marina said softly. "And I think a part of her had already left much earlier, you know, as if she had faded away little by little, year after year." And then, like a flash of lightning, came the understanding. Marina began to cry, not the delicate tears she had learned to produce, but deep sobs that shook her. "I was becoming her, I was disappearing in the same way. If nothing had happened, if I had continued with Raphael in 20 years, I would be just like my mother, faded, tired, no longer knowing who I was." Beatrice held her hand as Marina cried, not trying to comfort or rush the process, just being present. That revelation was a turning point. Marina realized that escaping Raphael was not just about protecting herself and the baby physically, it was about saving her own essence, her own soul, from a slow extinction. She began to make a list of things she liked, things Raphael had said were silly or inappropriate. She liked to sing in the shower. She liked to read science fiction novels. She liked to wear vibrant colors. She liked to dance when no one was looking. She liked to eat chocolate fudge balls for breakfast. They were small things, but they were hers, and she was reclaiming each one of them. Marina had also started attending a support group for women who had experienced abusive relationships. The group met every Thursday evening at the Hampstead Community Centre. There were 7 regular women of different ages and backgrounds, but all sharing the experience of having survived relationships where they were diminished, controlled, or mistreated. In the group, Marina met Sarah, not the obstetrician, but another Sarah, a 42-year-old teacher who had left a 15-year marriage where her husband controlled every penny she spent. She met Patricia, a young lawyer whose ex-boyfriend had isolated her from all her friends and family. She met Rita, a restaurant owner who had endured years of constant criticism about her weight and appearance. Each story was unique, but the patterns were chillingly similar. What Marina discovered in the group was that recovery was not linear. There were days where she felt strong and confident, days where she believed she had overcome the trauma. And then there were days where the slightest trigger, a specific coffee smell, a male voice with a certain authoritarian tone, a casual comment from a stranger, threw her back into that hotel corridor. But the other women in the group taught Marina that this was normal, that healing moved in spirals, not in straight lines. While Marina rebuilt her life, Raphael faced his own consequences. Ocean Logistics' independent investigation had concluded, and the results were damning. They confirmed multiple instances of workplace harassment, abuse of power, and creation of a hostile work environment. Raphael was formally dismissed for gross misconduct, losing not only his salary, but also stock options worth millions. The company also announced structural changes, including a new confidential channel for complaints and mandatory harassment training for all executives. Raphael tried to sue the company for wrongful dismissal, but his lawyers were clear. The evidence was overwhelming, and a public lawsuit would only bring more negative attention. He was being shunned by London's business elite. Invitations to social events had dried up. Professional contacts weren't returning calls. He had become a pariah, an example of what happened when abusive behavior finally met real consequences. But the biggest transformation in Raphael was beginning to happen not by choice but by exhaustion. After 2 months of trying to control the narrative, trying to portray himself as a victim, trying to blame Marina and social media for his downfall, he finally had a moment of collapse. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, alone in his apartment that he now could barely afford, looking out at the view of Ipanema Beach that once filled him with pride. He saw his reflection in the window glass and didn't recognize the man staring back. On impulse, Raphael sought a therapist. Not because he was genuinely interested in change, but because his lawyer suggested that evidence of psychological treatment could help in future legal disputes. But the therapist he found, Dr. Henry Moore, was not interested in participating in a performance. In the first session, he got straight to the point. "Raphael, why are you here?" Raphael gave his rehearsed answer about stress, about being misunderstood, about wanting tools to better manage difficult situations. Dr. Henry listened in silence and then said something no one had ever said to Raphael in his entire life. "All of that is a lie. You're here because your life has fallen apart, because people are holding you accountable for your actions, and because you don't know how to deal with it. We can work with the truth, or you can keep lying to yourself. Your choice." Raphael almost walked out of the session right then. But something made him stay. Perhaps it was the weariness of maintaining the lies. Perhaps it was curiosity about who he would be if he stopped pretending. Perhaps it was just desperation. He stayed, and for the first time in his adult life, began the difficult work of looking honestly at himself. It wouldn't be fast and it wouldn't be easy, and he would resist many times along the way. But it was a beginning. Marina didn't know about Raphael's journey, and it wasn't her responsibility to know. She was focused on her own journey, on preparing the baby's room with simple furniture she assembled herself, following YouTube instructions, on choosing the perfect name for her daughter. She decided to name the baby Luna, because it was a name that represented light in darkness, and that's what that child would be, a light that would guide her through the difficult nights that were still to come. Marina was painting the nursery walls in a soft shade of lavender when she felt a strong contraction. She checked the clock. It was 8 in the evening. 36 weeks pregnant, a little early but not dangerously so. She breathed through the contraction as she had learned in childbirth classes, and when it passed, she continued painting. 3 more contractions came in the next hour, spaced but regular. Marina knew what that meant. Luna was on her way. Marina called Ms. Eleanor Green, who had become a maternal figure in her life. Ms. Eleanor Green arrived in 20 minutes, calm and efficient, helping Marina pack her hospital bag, checking if she had all the necessary documents. "Breathe, dear. You're going to do great," Ms. Eleanor Green said as she called a taxi. The trip to St. Jude's Hospital was quick, the City of London seeming to part ways for them. Marina was nervous, not only about the prospect of childbirth, but because she would be doing it alone, without a partner by her side. But then she thought of all the women she had met at Hope House, in the support group, in the messages she had received from strangers who had become friends. She was not alone. She had an entire network of support, even if it wasn't in the traditional way she had always imagined. Dr. Paula Jones, the obstetrician who had treated her on the night of the incident, had insisted on attending Marina's delivery. When they arrived at the hospital, Paula was already there, wearing her blue scrubs and with that reassuring smile. "Ready to meet your Luna?" she asked, holding Marina's hands. Marina nodded, tears already beginning to form in her eyes. Labor was long and intense. Marina was in active labor for 8 hours, enduring waves of pain that came and went like tides. Ms. Eleanor Green was by her side the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her face with a damp cloth, whispering words of encouragement. Dr. Helen also appeared, even though it was midnight, because she had accompanied Marina from the beginning and wanted to be present for this crucial moment. There was a moment of panic when Marina heard a noise in the corridor that reminded her of that night at the hotel. Her body completely stiffened, her breathing accelerated, and she began to hyperventilate. Dr. Beatrice Allen, whom Marina had asked to be present as part of her support team, immediately recognized the signs of a trauma-related panic attack. Beatrice positioned herself where Marina could see her clearly, established eye contact, and began to guide her through a grounding technique. "Marina, look at me. See my eyes. You are safe. You are in the hospital. You are about to meet your daughter. Breathe with me. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Marina focused on Beatrice's voice, letting the other sensations recede. Slowly, her breathing returned to normal, her body relaxed, and she was able to refocus on labor. At 6:15 in the morning, As the first rays of sun began to illuminate London, Luna Thompson was born. 7 pounds, 1 ounce of new life, crying loudly, healthy and perfect. Dr. Paula placed the baby on Marina's chest, and in that moment everything else disappeared. There was no Raphael, no trauma, no fear of the future. There was only that tiny life, those dark eyes trying to focus on her mother's face, that warm body against her chest. Marina cried, but these were completely different tears from those she had shed in recent months. They were tears of relief, of love, of hope, of gratitude for having made it this far. "Hi, Luna," she whispered. "I'm your mommy, and I promise I'll always protect you. I promise you'll grow up knowing you deserve respect, that you deserve gentle love, that you deserve to choose your own life." The nurse Claudia, who also made a point of being present, took a photo of that moment. The soft dawn light streamed through the window, bathing Marina and Luna in a warm, golden glow. In the photo, Marina was looking at the baby with an expression of pure love, and there was something else on her face that wasn't there before: freedom. The following hours were a blur of examinations, learning to breastfeed, receiving brief visits from all the women who had supported Marina on her journey. Julia appeared with a bouquet of flowers, shy but emotional, to see that Marina and the baby were well. The women from the support group made a quick visit, bringing simple but meaningful handmade gifts. Even Camilla Nolan, the journalist, sent a card congratulating Marina and thanking her for her courage. On the second day in the hospital, while Marina was breastfeeding Luna, her phone rang. It was Prosecutor Andrea Carter. "Marina, I have news about the case. Raphael has signed an agreement. He will pay generous child support for Luna until she turns 18, as well as compensation for you for emotional damages. He has also formally agreed to have no contact with you or the child, relinquishing his parental rights." Marina processed the information in silence. Part of her always imagined there would be a prolonged legal battle, that Raphael would fight for control until the end. But perhaps, just perhaps, something had changed in him, too. "Is he okay?" she found herself asking, surprising herself with the question. Andrea hesitated before answering. "He's in intensive therapy, according to his lawyer. Apparently he's trying to work on his issues." "I don't know if it will work, Marina. Real change takes years of hard work, but at least he's trying." Marina nodded. Even though Andrea couldn't see her, she felt no anger towards Raphael at that moment. She felt pity, perhaps. Pity for the man who had so much, but was so empty inside that he needed to control others to feel powerful. On the day of her hospital discharge, Marina dressed Luna in a pink outfit she had chosen herself, with no one telling her that the color didn't suit or the style wasn't appropriate. She carefully placed the baby in the car seat, checking twice that it was securely fastened. Ms. Eleanor Green was there to take them home, her old but reliable car waiting at the hospital entrance. The drive back to Hampstead was silent, Marina in the back seat beside Luna, watching the city pass by the windows. London was radiant that October morning, the sky cloudless blue, the sun shining over the bay. Marina thought about how that city had witnessed her pain, but now was witnessing her new beginning. When they arrived at the apartment, Marina slowly climbed the steps, carrying Luna in the car seat. She opened the door and entered her small space, now transformed into a home. Luna's room was ready. The lavender walls she had painted, the simple but cozy crib, the stuffed animals that friends had given as gifts. It wasn't luxurious, but it was full of love, and that was infinitely more valuable. Marina sat in the nursing armchair she had found at a second-hand shop. Luna nestled in her arms. She looked out the small window, seeing the city lights beginning to turn on as day turned into night. And then came the final revelation, the one she had been building towards all those months, without fully realizing it. It wasn't Raphael's public downfall that freed her. It wasn't the viral video. It wasn't the corporate consequences. It wasn't the legal proceedings. All those things were catalysts, yes, but the true liberation came from within. It came when she decided to stop hiding her pain, when she decided to believe she deserved more, when she decided it would be better to be alone and respected than accompanied and diminished. Freedom was not given to her by external forces. Freedom was something she chose herself, moment by moment, decision by decision. It was choosing to walk out of that corridor instead of minimizing what had happened. It was choosing to accept help instead of pretending she could do everything alone. It was choosing to face her trauma instead of burying it. It was choosing to build a new life, even without knowing if she could, instead of returning to the false security of what was familiar. Marina looked at Luna, who slept peacefully in her arms, completely oblivious to the battles her mother had fought to bring her into a safe environment. "You will grow up knowing you are strong," Marina whispered. "You will grow up seeing your mother stand up every day and make courageous choices. You will grow up understanding that true love respects, not controls, that real partnership elevates, not diminishes, that you always have the right to protect your own peace." The following months were not easy. There were nights when Luna cried and Marina cried with her, exhausted and wondering if she could do it alone. There were days when money was tight and she needed to ask for help again. There were moments when loneliness weighed heavily and she missed having a partner, not Raphael specifically, but the idea of companionship. But in each of these difficult moments, Marina made a conscious choice not to turn back, to keep moving forward, to trust the process. Marina returned to work as a translator when Luna was 3 months old, working from home while the baby slept or played on her activity mat. She began to build a reputation, gaining better clients, increasing her rates. She wasn't rich, not by a long shot, but she was building something that was hers, based on her own merit. She also began to speak publicly about her experience. At the invitation of Dr. Helen's organization, Marina participated in panels on psychological abuse, sharing her story with other women who were going through similar situations. It was difficult at first, reliving those moments in public, but Marina discovered that there was power in transforming her pain into purpose. Julia, the young woman who had kept her camera on that crucial night, became Marina's friend. They met for coffee occasionally, and Julia, who had been deeply affected by what she witnessed, had shifted the focus of her social media content. She now used her platform to educate about signs of abusive relationships, to amplify the voices of survivors, to hold problematic behaviors accountable. 1 year after that night at the Grand Metropolitan, Marina was in her apartment celebrating Luna's first birthday. It wasn't a big party, just a few close friends, the women who had become her true family. Luna, now toddling clumsily and exploring everything with insatiable curiosity, was covered in cake frosting, laughing, as she tried to catch the balloons floating from the ceiling. Marina watched the scene, her heart overflowing with gratitude. She thought of the woman she was a year ago, so lost, so small, so convinced she had no choices. And she looked at the woman she was now, still in the process of healing, still facing challenges, but fundamentally transformed. She had survived. More than that, she had truly begun to live. That night, after everyone had left and Luna was sleeping in her crib, Marina went to her small apartment balcony. London stretched before her, millions of lights, twinkling in the darkness. Somewhere in that city, Raphael was living his own journey, dealing with his own consequences. Marina wished him genuine healing, not for him, but because the world needed fewer men who hurt and more men who worked to change. But Raphael was no longer her concern. Her concern was Luna, it was herself, it was the life they were building together. A life based on respect, on conscious choices, on love that uplifted instead of diminished. Marina took a deep breath of the fresh night air and smiled. Not a forced smile to please others, but a true smile that came from somewhere deep within her. She had begun, not just surviving, but truly living. And this was just the beginning. Dear listeners, we hope Marina and Luna's story has deeply touched your hearts. This journey of courage and reconstruction reminds us that true freedom comes from within, from the choices we make when we decide to no longer hide our pain. To continue experiencing intense emotions like this, we've prepared a special playlist full of stories that explore the complexity of life, relationships, and human strength. You can find it right here. If this narrative resonated with you, Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. It helps us continue to bring stories that matter. Every day, we share new narratives that celebrate resilience, self-love, and the courage to start anew. We look forward to hearing what you thought of Marina's story in the comments. Until the next journey.